Hi everyone, I'm Omar Oakes, Media and Technology Editor at Campaign Magazine, and I'm pleased to be bringing you our next afternoon session, which is going to address one of the most important issues facing the performance marketing world, the fact that third-party cookies, those little bits of code that allow advertisers to track what internet users are doing online, are set to disappear. We're going to explore whether ultimately this is a good thing for advertisers, agencies, and publishers. What, if anything, will take the cookie's place, and whether the death of the cookie requires brands to look beyond the audience and pay much more attention to the content and context against which they are advertising. And to help answer these crucial questions for our industry are Asha Gordon, Head of Paid Media at Tug, the full-service digital performance marketing agency, and Vivienne Mackinnon, Head of Marketing at Zipcar, the car-sharing company, part of Avis. Let's just take 30 seconds, guys. Thank you very much for joining today's session. Let's just take 30 seconds, explain to the audience what your job entails. Vivienne, please start.
Sure. So I head up the marketing team for Zipcar here in the UK. And my team and I are responsible for digital marketing, CRM, PR, creative, and community management. Zipcar's mission is to enable simple and responsible urban living. And my team's objectives are broad but straightforward. To get people to know what Zipcar is, not that it's just something to do with cars, get members to join and encourage them to use our on-demand cars and vans.
Thank you. And Asha.
Hi, thanks for having me. As you said, I'm head of biddable media at Tug, so I work across display, video, PPC, paid social, amongst the other channels. So it's my role just to ensure that myself, the team, and our clients have the correct information, tools, processes to activate and optimize their paid media campaigns.
All right, and please, out there in the audience, please do ask as many questions as possible, and I will endeavour to get them all in. It's the same format if you've been watching this morning. It's the same format where you type your questions into the box, and they will pop up on my screen, and we'll get to as many as possible. But first, Asha, maybe explain to the audience out there what the state of play is with regulation and why we're talking about a cookieless future now in online advertising.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of talk about regulation, a lot of government regulation in relation to data privacy. So the one we hear about most often is GDPR in the EU, but there's a lot more worldwide. So CCPA in California, and there's a Brazilian one that's coming to fruition now as well. And then on top of that, privacy has become a bit of a unique selling point for some companies. So Apple has blocked third-party cookies in its Safari browser. Firefox has done that as well. And then finally, there's a deep distrust amongst consumers around advertising and advertising companies. So what this has meant is that Google has had to act and has released a timeline of removal of the third-party cookie. So the cookie's been around for over 25 years, so it's quite an old solution that needs to be updated to be compliant in this world of like data regulation and usage. So as Chrome is the most popular browser, now that Google's removing the third-party cookie, it means that vendors, publishers, and a lot of people need to act because it's going to affect their businesses and affect targeting.
And you mentioned Apple. Does this also affect what happens in apps as well? So you've got the IDFA, which by default, Apple devices are going to block. Yeah, consumers actually have to turn it on. When we talk about cookies, does the broader discussion include that as well?
So it's a little bit different for apps. So you've got different targeting for apps. So there's been talk about iOS 14 and how that affects Facebook, for example, how that's targeting. So within apps and on phones, people can actually opt in and out to sharing their data with different apps that are on the process as well. Third-party cookies actually related to, at the moment, how we're talking about it relates to the browser and the actions that people can take on browser.
Okay, understood. And Vivienne, from the brand's point of view, have you come up with a post-cookie strategy? What changes are you looking at making? We might get into what Google specifically has said in terms of, I was going to mention the word cohorts, but what Google specifically said that they're going to enable with the post-cookie feature. Is it set in stone, your strategy? Where are you at?
That's a $1 million question, to be honest. The answer is no, it's not. I think with so many moving parts, as Asha just rightly said, no one brand could have 100% a set strategy at this point going forwards, because there's still so much that's being worked out by the big tech firms, Google included. But in terms of media, what we are doing is proactively taking a two-pronged approach. So firstly, we're utilising what we can do now as much as possible with our media partner, including Tug. and also preparing a test and learn approach for when things do change. And to be honest, we're kind of looking forward to that. The testing, learning, trying different things, that's the fun part of digital marketing. So we're really looking forward to that and then expanding out our roadmaps. What we do know is really important is first-party data and pulling on our owned media. So in this case, we're pretty lucky, to be honest, at Zipcar. We have a huge number of members at Zipcar. We've built ourselves a membership base as opposed to a one-off transactional type service. So we're focusing very much right now in terms of our CRM and our owned media. So by that, for example, we know that a lot of our members join for one-off use cases. So they're moving house, they need to go to a tip, something like that, as we tend to be quite practical. So they join, they use the car, great, well done. However, getting that cohort of people to drive again and use us regularly is very difficult. So what we're doing is expanding out our CRM activity to target that group and see how we can engage them more and get them to use us for different use cases. Similarly, loyalty will be really key for us. So again, focusing on our first party owned data and looking at ways we can reward and surprise and delight our members as well.
It's really interesting, and you talk about some of the use cases that people might have for a Zipcar. I imagine a lot of them your users are in urban areas where they might not have cars, live in a small flat, etc. So they have these one-off use cases. So it raises interesting questions for the different audience that you have. Questions come in already. Do publisher cookies, especially Google and Facebook, count as first or third-party cookies when deployed on a client's website to power remarketing within the walled gardens? Asha, do they?
That's a great question, and that means it's third party if it's deployed outside of their walled garden, as we call it. So if you go to Google and you interact with Google and they've got your data, that's first party because it's happening on Google, and that's where you're having that conversation or that journey. If Google passes that data to another website or a different person or somewhere else that's off Google, that means it's third party.
Okay, understood. So given what Vivienne just said, Asha, do you think there's a chance for brands like to think about, I was going to put it saying customers rather than cookies in terms of how your strategy is based? What do I mean by that? What are the benefits for consumers from a customer-led approach? What do we mean by that difference?
I think that's a great way to put it. You know, that could be a slogan: customers before cookies. So what we should always be concerned about is putting the customer and the customer's journey. The end goal is always going to be the same. You want to make sure you're targeting the relevant people with your offering, and that isn't a cookie. That is an actual customer or an individual that wants to actually use your product or buy your product. So giving the customer a bit more control over their privacy means it's a benefit for them. So an example I always use is if someone wants to, if someone has really big feet and wants to buy size 12 or size 13, giving that personalized experience, a personalized journey, and showing them an ad if you've got those sizes in stock works really well. So you should always be thinking about, how can I benefit this customer? How can I show them an ad or a journey that's specific to them, and making sure it works for them? And I think if users actually understood that and understood that that's how it works, they would be happy with personalization, and if they knew that their data will be used in the right way.
Why do you think it is? I mean, when many people complain about online advertising, they always say a similar variant of this story where I bought something of John Lewis, to name an example. I bought something of John Lewis. I bought some shoes, size 12 shoes, and now following me on the internet are size 12 shoes from John Lewis, or something like that. They blame cookies for that. Is that going to completely disappear post third-party cookie?
So it's going to be different. It might not completely disappear, but it will be different from as we know it. And the main thing that's going to happen is customers need to be able to opt in and to limit seeing those as well. So if you say, I'm on John Lewis, you can opt in to actually being served with targeted advertising based on that. So if it's your choice to not be followed around, you should be able to say yes or no, basically.
So Vivienne, with that in mind, what more can you as a brand what more are you looking to do to take advantage with your first party data? It's data that you have, it's unique. What you're trying to do as a company, as you say, is to learn more about your consumer and target your messaging according to what they want. How do you do all that whilst also trying to maintain privacy in this post-cookie world?
Of course, it's so important. And to be honest, it's focusing on CRM. So for us, it's email, push, and in-app messages. And if like us, you've got an app, that's fantastic because you've got 3 own channels. You can really be specific with who you're talking to and what you're saying. So, it's talking to people on the channels they're going to be at, but what's relevant to them. So, for example, we wouldn't ever send a push message to everybody, we'd email to everybody. We target people based on what their interests are, when they last drove, what vehicle they last used us for as well, because CRM is critical. But again, we still need to maintain that trust. And one of the key ways of doing that is to be as useful and as relevant as possible. But other than kind of email, like I say, what other channels do you have at your disposal as a brand to talk to your members, customers, to make it as a pleasurable and an efficient experience for them? So, like I say, everything from in-app and push messages to website changes, pop-ups, for example. And we're also looking at where else we can gather data from as well. That's going to be critical for every brand, and that's critical from now, to be honest. Obviously, it goes without saying you need to collect data in a GDPR compliant way and handle it in a GDPR compliant way, but there's plenty of ways that brands can increase their first party data, from pop-ups on the website to social campaigns to competitions, and like I said, that's definitely what we're looking at the moment. The key to all this, of course, is focusing on people who are relevant, a relevant audience, because again, it's the relevancy that's going to make sure they're engaged, they're going to actually interact with you, they're going to actually go purchase your product or use your service. Because without that, it's wasted effort. And again, you'll get back to the point of not having trust from the prospect audience.
And I was going to ask, is this going to be more costly for you as an organization? I tend to think where using cookies, it's quite a lightweight, cheap way of collecting information about users and using that to target them. All these things you mentioned about these different techniques and different strategies to build up data, how much more costly is that going to be?
From an own media perspective, from CRM, not too much. It's mainly manpower, to be honest, so that will potentially be an additional cost, be that through agencies you may use or increased hires. Where there is potential for increased costs is in paid media. And that comes down to test and learn that Asha was talking to earlier. So, if normally we'd run one campaign, actually we might have with 1 or 2 partners. Actually, for a campaign, we might need to try 3, 4, 5 different partners to see what works, to see what doesn't work. There is, of course, going to be additional costs related to that. And that's something that we will still have to work through, and other brands will have to work through as well.
And Asha, so moving to this post-cookie future, what do you think the future of, this is an audience question now, what do you think the future of retargeting will look like after Google's move to block third-party cookies?
So there's going to be a lot of change, and Google actually, as part of their privacy sandbox, which is just a lot of different applications they're testing to move forward from a cookieless world. It's going to be, well, they've released something, or they're testing something called Fledge. So they've got a load of different things they're testing in their privacy sandbox to actually replace what we're doing with third-party cookies. And with Fledge, what they want to do is limit the amount of user data that is flowing to different websites or partners that aren't Google. So what that means is that Google will try and decipher as much as they can on their actual browser within Google, and then share only the data that's necessary with different browsers. So what we're going to see moving forward is that it's going to be less data is going to be used to activate retargeting audience. So it might not be as accurate as we see moving forward, but it's also a lot of people will need to make sure that they're compliant and they're using opt-in users. But what it could also mean is that we have to be a bit less reliant on retargeting, because we might not be able to have that data as much. So it might just be retargeting might be within your own personal data and using your own first-party data to send out multiple emails or to entice people back that have actually interacted with you using the first-party source.
Lots of questions flooding in now. Thank you, audience, and keep them coming. I wonder if I could direct this at you, Vivienne. Is there a need to split media cookies consent between functional performance purposes, such as channel attribution, basic measurements, to split that between or advertising purpose, which is retargeting and personalization? And if yes, how?
That's a good question. I'd actually defer that to Asha, because I don't know if we can do that.
Can we, Asha? Can we do that?
Not that I know of for now. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to look at in the future and just see how it actually works. But it's not something that I have read or seen at the moment.
Thank you to that person that asked that question. You've stumped the panel, which is we always like to see. How about this one? Can server-side website tagging help with consent and gathering user data? So anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one as well. So when hopefully I'm getting this right. So when you're talking about server-side, this is where you can plug in, Facebook or Google or another one of the bigger vendors or publishers can plug into your data. So for example, if you're using a Shopify site, Facebook can plug directly into that and they can see, they can use your data. And again, there you need to make sure that if you are doing that, there needs to be compliance on the user side. So it could be a way, it could definitely be an alternative way to do it. But again, it's all around compliance and making sure if you are plugging in that data, that the users or consumers are aware that is what's going on and they have opted into doing it too.
Okay. Vivienne, what do you think will change in terms of how you make online marketing decisions within the organization, given that, that you've talked about different techniques and ways of doing things post-cookie, and ultimately, you're going to have to justify this to a board, perhaps to a chief financial officer. How do you see that process changing? Is it going to become harder from the gap?
Very difficult question. Ultimately, yes, I think it will be harder in a way. I think what's really important is education and taking senior directors, CFOs and above, on that journey to understand what's happening. Those people in very senior roles aren't in a position, they're not close to it like we are. They don't necessarily know what's going on. So I think it's all about taking them on that journey to understand what's happening and the impact it's going to have on the activity and also the team as well. What I would say to that is to keep that information that you're sharing to top level. So I know that there's a lot of tech involved in this, and that's obviously really, really critical. But oftentimes when we speak kind of upwards, we can be a little bit too specific and a little bit too techy, let's just say. So keeping it top level, I think, will be really, really important. But also not to be alarmist. I think it's important to be truthful, take them on the journey and say there will be elements. This is going to be harder for the team. Exciting, yes, but there'll be a lot of testing and learning. But not to be alarmist. The question you have around increased costs, ultimately, potentially, yes, it will have that. But given the current climate, no matter how well a company's done or not done over the last year or so, every company is having a very, very close eye on the P&L. So it's really important not to kind of concern anyone too senior, but just, like I say, take them on that journey with you.
Mm-hmm. It comes down to a particular bugbear of mine is how marketing media spend is viewed purely as a cost by many organizations, when it should be seen as an opportunity as well to grow your brands and increase sales. But anyway, that's a different talk show. One for you, Asha, perhaps, and we've got a couple of minutes left, audience, if you want to maybe squeeze one more question in. But Asha, we touched a bit on Apple. What percentage of the audience do you think will become invisible due to iOS 14 we've talked about and IDFA?
That is a really good question. And what we've seen before, so for example, when other apps have had to get people to opt into their targeting, we see that most people actually do opt out of using targeting. So that could say it could be below 50%. But what we're also seeing now is, and I think Facebook are trialing this, they're trying to entice and engage users first and say, we need your consent, we need you to log in, so you get this personalized advertising. So if that was to work and Facebook and other apps were to convince users to opt in for more personalized service and show the usefulness of opting in, we might see anything above. But as it stands at the moment, I think it'll be below 50%.
Below 50%. How much below 50% do you reckon?
I'm going 45. At the moment, it's a guess, but we'll have to wait and see.
And just very quickly, how do you see that? Because it's an interesting question about Facebook trying to get users to opt in. How successful do you think that's going to be?
I don't think it will be successful yet, and I think Facebook will need to change their strategy if it is to work. What we've seen, I'm going to use WhatsApp as an example again. When they were telling people to upgrade to the new terms of service, a lot of people were opting out of that. So Facebook had to change their tacts. So at the moment, I don't think it'll be very successful, but Facebook are really good at testing and learning. So who knows in the future.
Last question now for Vivienne. Try and be brief. I'll try and stay on time. It's a good question though. How would you feel as a client of an agency if the future meant all conversion data was modelled? What do you think about that?
Oh, I'd be open to it, to be honest. I think there's obviously pros and cons, but I think if there's a way of making it efficient and as effective as possible, particularly with all the changes happening, yeah, I wouldn't feel too alarmed, let's just say.
Good, and part of the test and learn ethos. I like that.
Okay.
We're out of time, unfortunately, but thank you both so much. Thank you for joining this panel, Vivienne and Asha. Thank you very much. Now, after a quick break, I'll be back with our first panel discussion of the afternoon, which is a good one, so please stick around. It's about how to maximize creativity in performance marketing. We'll be back at around 2:15.